in terms of our trade relations with the United States, Doha is the number one issue. There's a lot of people, there are some people who are canvassing, alternative arrangements that we might make with the coalitions of the willing or with the United States or North Atlantic Agreement and so forth. We would see that getting in the way of concluding Doha. We take the view that the United States is a little bit unrealistic in looking for further market opening at this point from some of those from whom it's looking for further market opening as a price for agreeing to put a cap on their own agricultural supports. US agricultural supports are exceptionally generous and trade distorting. The US is short of money at the present time for other purposes. It's running very large deficits. Admittedly, the agriculture budget isn't a huge portion of the total US budget, but it's still significant, still several billions, many billions involved. And for the US to put a cap on its agricultural support, which would be one of the way of moving to the next stage to move beyond modalities, is something we think they should do. We've made our offers, and we think they should make theirs and get on with it at this stage. The other big thing I didn't mention, now that you mentioned the things I didn't mention, is the fact that last week the FAA reauthorization legislation, as passed in the House of Representatives, contains language that would negate the Open Skies Agreement, that would negate the air safety agreement that we've made with the United States. Both of those are the two biggest diplomatic achievements of a practical kind in the regulatory field that we have to show for the last 5 or 6 years. The Open Skies Agreement, Phase 1 and now Phase 2, and the Air Safety Agreement. Both of those would be put aside by new language that's been inserted into the FAA reauthorization legislation on ownership and control, defining it in a way that would define us out of the market, and introducing discriminatory fees in regard to repair stations, which would again would negate the air safety agreement. Now, one of the things I'll be concentrating on when I go back is lobbying to get the Senate to remove this language and to get the administration, the Secretary for Transportation, to say that this language has no place in the FAA reauthorization legislation, which I believe it doesn't. I think that the Americans deserve the benefits of competition in the airline field. I believe, just as we have benefited from airline deregulation here in Europe, and people can travel around this continent at a modest cost now, that Americans should be able to benefit from European airlines entering the US market and competing for business there, as we are proposing in the Open Skies Agreement Phase 1 and Phase 2, which unfortunately this legislation, if it goes forward in its present form, would put aside. I think if you go right across the agenda of issues where President Obama said before his election that he would take action, and in which many Europeans invested much hope, he has taken action on all of the various fronts. I think his promotion of cap and trade legislation on climate change is very important from a European perspective. I think it's good that it is proceeding at a pace which should mean that we will have legislation approved at least by one of the houses and by a committee of the other house before Copenhagen. However, there is some concern that in the effort to get the legislation through, aspects of it are being watered down a little bit earlier than one might have wished, insofar as auctioning has been abandoned but for 15% of the permits, and also the cap has been slightly raised, even though the US cap is a good deal higher than ours as far as emissions are concerned. Likewise, on human rights and Guantanamo, the commitment to close Guantanamo was a very important commitment. Practical steps are being taken to make that happen. It is important, of course, to acknowledge that 500 people had been released from Guantanamo under the previous administration. It now appears as if the United States is going, however, for a minority of people who, in their view, intend to go back to terrorism, and they can identify that from either their previous conduct or things they have said, may find themselves in indefinite detention without trial. Something that goes against US legal traditions. There are some precedents for it. It's also something that goes against the European Convention